So this is going to be a video tutorial for essentially a civil workflow for creating line work and surfaces from Scene, the FARO software, into Recap and also Civil 3D to do some of that survey creation. So we're going to start with Scene, and we're at the point now where we have a registered, and if it also was on coordinates, georeferenced data set, which has also had the project point cloud created. So this is the sort of unified, optimized project point cloud that we're looking at here, with all the overlap reduced and things like that. We can see that there's some cleanup we can do here if we have not cleaned up the scans themselves that we can do inside of the project point cloud. The first thing I may do is go to my clipping box here, and it will create a box in the center of my screen. Which I can then use to sort of quickly isolate whatever sort of road noise or things like that exist. And I will use my point cloud polygon selection tool, not the one next to it. The yellow one is for the loaded data, and just do a set of single left clicks and double click to finish the selection. Outside of the clipping box, go ahead and right click. Looks like I'm not quite outside of it. I'm going to hit escape, get myself outside that clipping box, right click, and say delete. So that current selection of data points has been deleted. You'll also notice this looks a little bit like a road section tool here, in terms of actually being able to clip out some road sections. Now I've already done that, but you can very quickly see with the tools I'm showing you here how you could take this clipping box and create multiple sections along it. So I can right click along that box and go to create clipping boxes along an axis, and you can choose X, Y, or Z. In this case I'm going to choose the X direction, and I'm going to say that I would like to create several clipping boxes actually in the negative direction, not the positive direction, so it's giving me a preview of where those boxes will show up. I'm going to do it at 10 foot spacing. So I can call this road underscore 10 foot. So these are 10 foot road sections. I can say OK, and now those sections have been created. I can right click inside one of these boxes and do a 3D selection from active clipping boxes, and then once the points have been selected and are yellow, I can then go back and use the export 3D selection using active clipping boxes function. So what this will do is enable me to export just the data that's inside each of those sectioned boxes, either as a DXF or PTS. DXF, PTS. DXF is probably not recommended unless you have a very, very small amount of data, because it will import into AutoCAD as individual objects for each point. I would suggest either E57, PTS, or XYZ in terms of an export format. All of those will go into Recap and AutoCAD Civil 3D. So that is one potential workflow here. We're actually going to go ahead and do some additional clipping inside of our Recap platform, but we're not going to get there just yet. So right now I'm going to go ahead and disable all these clipping boxes, bring my data back. I can also right click and then make them invisible, so I can bring them back anytime they're ready to be activated. In here in the project point cloud we can do, but probably for this application don't need to do a ton of it. We could do some editing. We're going to go ahead and do some of that in Recap. But again, using your polygon selection tools, grab things like these cones and this vehicle that are obstructing the ground surface, because we're going to want to have those gone when we actually go to do this surfacing inside of Civil 3D. for now, what we're going to do is get to a workflow inside of Scene and show you how to create some civil deliverables in just basic line work. So we're going to start with kind of aligning ourselves on this curb here. And in order to connect the Scene software to AutoCAD, we need to install two things. You need to have the Kubit software purchased, so Kubit PointSense or PointSense Pro, or also known as FARO Cloud Pro. And you also need to go to the FARO 3D App Center and install the Kubit Draw-to-CAD plugin. So the plugin is free, the software is a paid software. So I can go and pick our browser here, and if you just do a Google search for FARO 3D App Center, you should be able to very quickly get yourself to this site. And we can either click on Scene plugin apps or just scroll down to the bottom. The one you want to download and install to Scene is called Draw-to-CAD Basic, and it is by Kubit. And once you have that and you follow the directions to download and install that in Scene, you will see this toolbar show up. So you have the ability to transfer from the view here 3D points or 2D points and clear your points. So typically you would want to do this on two screens, but since we only have one here, we are going to kind of make do with what we've got. And I'll open up Civil 3D. So you have Civil 3D on one side, Scene on the other. Now in order to start drawing, you have to get the two sort of on the same page. So let's say I want to do a 2D polyline. And over here in Scene as well, I might also say that I want to do a 2D polyline. When you're ready to start picking points, and you can kind of watch AutoCAD as we do this, it's transferring coordinates of these points to CAD as I click on them. So I can kind of reposition myself to better see what's going on in that curb. Oops, looks like I picked a bad point there. So let's hit U over in AutoCAD. Let's hit U for undo. We will also zoom over to our selection here and go back to Scene and keep picking. So I'm going to hold my Shift key in order to be able to rotate so I'm not in point selection mode anymore. And then when I'm ready, go back to picking my points here. So you get an idea of how that's going to work. We're going to go ahead, go back to AutoCAD and hit enter to finish that function up, and you can start to see some of the line work that you've drawn in there. So that's sort of the line work function. Same deal if you want to create lines, arcs, whatever the feature is you want to draw in CAD. Get to the point where you're ready to draw that feature and go over and pick whether you want 3D or 2D coordinates selected, and the scene software will then allow you to go ahead and transfer those over. So that's the line work portion of it. The surface portion of it does involve some movement of the point cloud. Now, the advantage of doing this workflow we just described here is that it allows you to not have to bring over the entire point cloud into the AutoCAD environment, which, as most of us who have tried that know, can be a little bit cumbersome. So we can do some of our work in the scene software where it's very easy to maneuver and navigate around, and then do some of the other things like our surfaces sort of as a separate piece. So one thing we may want to do here, and what I would recommend doing before transferring this, is doing some clipping. So again, create a clipping box, as in this case we have already done, and go ahead and activate the one that I'm using, but get rid of basically all the data except for what's pretty close to the ground and things that are at the extents of your data or of the surface that you're interested. Right click inside the box, do a 3D selection from your active clipping boxes, and then again, once that is finished, export those points as E57, PTS, or XYZ. Now you can bring the individual FLS files in from the FARO software, which is a very viable solution as well. The one reason I do prefer, even though it takes a little bit more time, the project point cloud is because it's had the overlap reduced, so it's very optimized. It's got no overlap, and the color, as you'll notice here, has been sort of smoothed out, so you have a cleaner looking point cloud. So we're going to transition to recap, where we have taken that clipped data set in, and I did mention that we would do some editing. So inside a recap, you can go to your fence selection tool here, and if you have something that you would prefer to delete and not have in your data, double click to finish. You can either say delete or clear the selection. So I could say I'd like to delete that. So that's an example of how to get rid of some of the data. Same thing goes if you want to do some clipping. So take some time to maybe clip out the area that you want, making sure to get rid of things that are going to create a surface that you're maybe not as interested in. And then go ahead and in recap, I've already got the region that I have selected as a ground surface. So I can go ahead and, I believe, hide everything else. So I turn that layer off. See if we can create a selection from that. Or even better, let's just create another sort of quick selection along the road here, create a surface from that. So we'll go back to fence. We will create a selection. Double click in to finish our selection, and we will say clip outside. So this will get rid of everything except for that one section. And then we can go ahead and, I believe, with that region, create a new region. Oh, you know what? We need to highlight this whole thing. So go ahead and just reselect the area. Double click to finish it. Now is where we create a region. So I want to create a new region. We'll call it Ground Surface 2. And I want to export just this piece to Civil 3D to sort of minimize the amount of points that I actually need to bring in. So this is going to create an RCS, it stands for Recap Scan file, that I can then bring into Civil 3D. So give that a minute to finish exporting. I can now minimize recap And inside of the AutoCAD environment, and we'll go ahead and maximize this now. I can go ahead into the command prompt here and type in point cloud attach. Where I'll then go locate the RCS file, so make sure you have the right file selected. Hit open. I'm not going to specify a path, I just want it to drop in right where it was before. So there's that piece of the roadwork that does actually correspond with the same line work we imported earlier. So hit escape, so we're no longer looking at just that. This is a Kubit toolbar that shows up here. We can close out of that to give ourselves some more space. And what you'll notice is on the left hand side you can see our point cloud here, which does not currently have Civil 3D properties, but if we right click we can say add Civil 3D properties and then hit yes. And we can call it our ground surface and have it be true color. We'll hit OK. So our point cloud now has Civil 3D properties, and we can go to the properties of that point cloud and sort of mess around with the different visualizations that you can do. So showing the high and low spots, you can kind of see how that road contours there and where that drainage is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So that's a right click on the cloud itself and go into the properties. Leave it back with the true color. And you can add those points then to a surface. So I can say add points to surface. I'm going to give it a name, say 1 and 5 foot contours. Next. We'll just do the entire extent of that point cloud since we have already clipped it. Let's say finish. And this will take a moment to actually generate that surface for us. Now once the surface has been generated, as with any other surface, we can go through and actually eliminate the amount of points on that surface so that it's not so dense. So we're at 91%. I'm going to let this video go ahead and run in real time just so we can get a feel for what this is actually going to take in terms of computing power to do a surface like this. So the surface is now complete. You can close that box. If you zoom in here, I can actually see the surface that was created. Now the hole you're seeing here is where the scanner was positioned, and you can see that the rest of that surface is actually quite dense. And so the properties of this surface, we go to surfaces, definitions, and we can start to edit that actual surface itself if we choose to do so.